He was the world's most dangerous secret agent. But before the fame, the suits, and the shaken martinis, Sean Connery was just a dirt-poor kid from the slums of Edinburgh. And the way he escaped it all? That's the story nobody talks about. Born Thomas Sean Connery in 1930, he entered a world that didn't promise him much. His parents lived in a small, crumbling tenement, and every day was a fight to survive. His father was a factory worker and lorry driver. His mother cleaned houses to put food on the table. Education wasn't a priority. It was a luxury. So by the age of 9, Connery dropped out of school and got to work. His first job? A milkman trudging through the misty streets of Edinburgh, delivering bottles door to door before most kids were even awake. But here's where it gets interesting. He didn't just fade into the background like so many others. Even as a teenager, Connery had presence. He was small at first, but something changed. By age 12, he had a growth spurt that shot him up to 6.2, and by 18, he was a giant among men. But don't scroll yet, because this next part explains everything. That early grind, the milk routes, the physical labor, the endless hustling shaped him. It toughened him up, mentally and physically. It's why later in life, when he walked into a room, people noticed. And when a taxi driver once asked him how he knew every single street in Edinburgh, Connery just smiled and said, "I used to deliver milk around here." The man never forgot where he came from, and that's just the beginning. Before he was James Bond, he served his country, not on screen but on the open sea. But what happened during his Navy days left marks, both on his body and on his soul. At just 16, Sean Connery enlisted in the Royal Navy, hungry for something bigger than the life he knew. It was 1946. World War II had just ended, but the scars of conflict still hung heavy in the air. Connery, barely more than a boy, trained at Portsmouth's Naval Gunnery School and joined an anti-aircraft crew aboard the HMS Formidable. He wasn't acting tough, he was living it. And here's the twist. This chapter of his life left him with 2 permanent reminders. Tattoos, but they weren't what you'd expect. One said, "Mum and Dad." The other, "Scotland Forever." Unlike the flashy, meaningless ink many sailors, Connery's were tributes to family, to roots, to loyalty. These weren't decorations, they were declarations. But hold that thought, because it connects to something even deeper. Just as he was beginning to settle into the Navy life, everything came crashing down. Connery started suffering from severe stomach pain, and after a series of examinations, doctors diagnosed him with a duodenal ulcer, a generational condition passed through the men in his family. At just 19, he was discharged, honorably, but suddenly, his military career cut short before it really began. But listen to this. That medical discharge pushed Connery into the wilderness. He was lost, broke, and looking for a purpose. He took on odd jobs: lorry driver, lifeguard, coffin polisher. Yes, you heard that right. He polished coffins to get by. But every struggle, every dead-end job was quietly building something in him. A resilience, a quiet storm. He didn't know it yet, but the man who once scrubbed caskets was about to rise from the ashes of disappointment and enter the spotlight. And what happens next will change everything. He was outnumbered 6-1. But what Sean Connery did next didn't just shock an entire gang. It made him a legend in the streets of Edinburgh. And it wasn't in a movie. It was real. In the early 1950s, Connery had just started dipping his toes into acting. Still working backstage at the King's Theatre to make ends meet, he was barely known, broke, and trying to find his footing. One night, after leaving a billiards hall, he caught the eye of the Valdor gang, one of the most feared and violent groups in the city. They tried to steal his jacket, and he wasn't having it. But that's not even the craziest part. As he walked home, 6 gang members followed him through the dark Edinburgh streets. Most people would have run, not Connery. Instead, he led them, calmly, deliberately, up to a 15-foot-high balcony at the Palais de Danse. It was there that Sean Connery transformed from an aspiring actor into something much more primal. He turned around and launched into them like a man possessed. He grabbed one thug by the throat and slammed him against the wall. Another, He lifted by the biceps and smashed their heads together like it was a scene from an action flick. Only this wasn't staged, this was real. 1 man against 6, and he left them in pieces. But don't scroll yet, because this moment became part of his myth. From that day on, the gang left him alone. In fact, they respected him. Word spread fast. Connery wasn't someone you messed with. He didn't just survive the encounter. He earned street cred that followed him into every room, every audition, and eventually, every movie set. That wasn't just a fight. It was a defining moment. One that hinted the world hadn't met James Bond yet, but he already existed in the shadows of Edinburgh. And here's where it gets even more surreal. Sean Connery was one offer away from becoming a professional footballer. And the reason he walked away, it wasn't money. It was mortality. By his early 20s, Connery had built himself into a physical specimen. Chiseled, massive, and magnetic, he caught attention everywhere he went. He even competed in the Mr. Universe competition, twice, depending on which report. You believe? And ranked 3rd in the junior class. He wasn't just handsome, he was sculpted like a Greek statue, and yet, he couldn't seem to win. But here's where it gets even crazier. Despite all that training, he kept losing to American bodybuilders, men who didn't train for endurance or athletics, but packed on sheer bulk. Connery hated it. He wanted strength. With purpose, not just for show. Meanwhile, his love for sports, especially football, was taking off. He played for local club Bonnyrigg Rose and was good enough to land a trial with East Fife. On a tour, he played in a match managed by none other than Matt Busby, the legendary Manchester United coach. That game changed everything. Busby was so impressed with Connery's raw power and movement that he offered him a professional contract, $25 a week. For a kid who once polished coffins and delivered milk, that was life-changing money. But here's the twist. Connery turned it down, and you won't believe why. He looked around the locker room and realized most of the top players were done. By age 30, he was already 23. That's when it hit him. Football was short-term. Acting might not be, so he made a decision that would alter his fate. He walked away from the pitch and toward the stage. He called it one of the smartest decisions of his life. And remember this moment, because that single rejection would one day pave the way to 007. 1 minute he was just another face in the chorus. The next, he was standing inches from Hollywood greatness, without even realizing how close he was to destiny. In 1953, Sean Connery's life took a wild turn during a bodybuilding competition. In London, backstage between flexing and posing, someone casually mentioned that auditions were happening for South Pacific. Without a second thought, and with barely any acting experience, Connery decided to give it a shot. He landed a small role as a sailor in the chorus line. No lines, no spotlight, just background noise. But don't scroll yet, because this next moment changed everything. When the production reached Edinburgh, something clicked. Connery got bumped up to a speaking part. Marine Corporal Hamilton Steeves. His pay jumped from $2 to $14.10 a week. It was his first taste of what it meant to be a real actor, and it lit a fire in him. The following year, when South Pacific returned due to popular demand, Connery wasn't just in the background anymore. He was promoted to a lead role, Lieutenant Buzz Adams, the same role Larry Hagman had played in the West End. But here's the part you won't believe. While filming, Connery was suddenly targeted. This time not by casting directors, but by the notorious Valdor gang again. They cornered him in a billiards hall, trying to steal his jacket. But when he refused and walked out, 6 of them followed. What happened next? We already told you, but the fallout was just beginning. Because after that fight, Connery became respected. Not just on stage, but on the street. He was no longer just a pretty face or a muscular prop. He was someone you didn't mess with. And that kind of reputation, it started to follow him into every audition room. But listen to this. It wasn't just fists and fast lines that carried Connery forward. It was something deeper, something magnetic. And as word spread in the theater world, one name kept coming. Up as someone to watch, Sean Connery had gone from chorus boy to rising star. and Hollywood was about to notice. He almost said no. The studio nearly passed him over, and the author of James Bond, he hated him. But what happened next would rewrite movie history forever. By the late 1950s, Sean Connery had built a modest career. Some stage roles, small parts in TV shows, a few walk-on roles in films. Nothing major, nothing lasting. But then came a call that would flip his world upside down. Producers were casting for a spy movie, a British secret agent. Codename 007. But here's the twist. Sean Connery wasn't anyone's first choice. Ian Fleming, the creator of James Bond, took one look at Connery and dismissed him completely. "He's not what I envisioned," he said. "I wanted Commander Bond, not some overgrown stuntman." Connery was too Scottish, too rough, too muscular, too unrefined. The role was slipping away. But don't scroll yet, because this next part is wild. It wasn't the producers who saved him. It was a woman. Dana Broccoli, the wife of producer Albert "Cubby" Broccoli, saw something in Connery that others didn't. She saw the charisma, the quiet danger, the raw sex appeal. She told her husband flat out, "That is James Bond." Reluctantly, they gave Connery a shot. Now here's the twist. Fleming still hated the idea, until his own girlfriend, Blanche Blackwell, convinced him otherwise. "He's got the charisma. He's got the danger," she said. That was all it took. After the premiere of Dr. No, Fleming was so impressed that he actually rewrote Bond's backstory to include Scottish heritage, just to match Connery. And suddenly, a milkman from Edinburgh was the world's deadliest spy. But it gets crazier. Connery didn't even want to commit to a franchise. He thought it might be a one-off. But after the world saw Dr. No, there was no going back. Fan mail poured in. The phrase Bond, James Bond became legend. And Sean Connery wasn't just famous. He was untouchable. But success came with price. And the deeper Connery got into the Bond machine, the more it began to eat away at him. He became the most iconic spy in cinema history, and he hated every second of it. Sean Connery's run as James Bond was the stuff of legend. From Russia with Love, Goldfinger, Thunderball. Every film made him richer, more famous, more powerful. But behind the camera, Connery was seething. He once said, "I have always hated that damn James Bond, I'd like to kill him." Imagine that, an actor wanting to kill the role that made him a star. But hold that thought, because this next part reveals why. With each new Bond film, the pressure mounted. The schedules were brutal, the media invasive, and fans refused to see him as anything but 007. Connery couldn't even walk down the street without people yelling, "Hey, James Bond." He'd built an empire, but he was trapped inside it. Even his closest friend, Michael Caine, admitted, if you were his friend in those days, you didn't mention Bond. But it gets worse. Connery was underpaid compared to the film's profits, and he grew resentful of the studio. By You Only Live. Twice he was barely speaking to producers, and after returning one last time for Diamonds Are Forever, he swore it was over. Finished. Then came Never Say Never Again in 1983, a one-off Bond remake from another studio. It was supposed to be a victory lap. Instead, it became a bitter reminder of everything he'd grown to despise. But here's where it gets even crazier. During this same period, Connery was doing some of his best non-Bond work. Films like The Hill and Marnie proved he was more than a tuxedo and a pistol. But the world wouldn't let him forget. No matter what he did, no matter how hard he tried, he was still Bond, and the toll that took on him would echo for decades. He turned down Gandalf. He turned down Dumbledore. He turned down everything, and the reason, it wasn't about money. It was about his sanity. By the early 2000s, Sean Connery had reached the top. He was knighted by the Queen, ranked among the greatest actors in British history, and had a filmography that stretched across generations. But after filming The League of Extraordinary Gentlemen in 2003, something inside him broke, and you won't believe what happened behind the scenes. From the start, Connery clashed with the film's director, Stephen Norrington. He called the production a mess, and even said the director should be locked up for insanity. The stress of trying to salvage a sinking movie nearly drove him mad. The studio ignored his advice. The script was a disaster. The edit was worse. But listen to this, he tried to fix it. Connery poured himself into post-production, desperately trying to save the film. But by the time it hit theaters, he was done. Not just with the movie, with acting. He turned down the role of Gandalf in The Lord of the Rings, even after being offered $30 million and 15% of the box office, which would have made him over $400 million. He also declined roles in Harry Potter and The Matrix. Why? Because, as he said, "I don't understand the scripts and I don't want to." Connery wasn't just walking away from movies, he was walking away from Hollywood. He was disillusioned, tired, and sick of dealing with what he called the idiots now making films. He officially retired in 2006. And just like that, one of the greatest careers in film history went silent. Fame gave him everything: money, power, immortality. But it also brought out secrets that Sean Connery could never fully bury. In 2006, an ex-romantic partner dropped a bombshell in her autobiography. She claimed Connery had been both physically and emotionally abusive during their relationship. Headlines exploded. Fans were stunned. The media had a field day. But here's where it gets deeply uncomfortable. These weren't the first signs of Connery's troubling views on women. In a 1965 interview with Playboy, he said he didn't see anything wrong with hitting a woman, as long as it wasn't with a clenched fist. Nearly 30 years later, in 1993, he told Vanity Fair that some women want a smack. The backlash was fierce. Connery later denied those views, saying in 2006 that he did not believe abuse was ever justified under any circumstance. But by then, the damage was done. Public opinion was divided. For some, it tainted his legacy. For others, it opened up a conversation about how society handles powerful men with dark pasts. And it doesn't end there. He had an affair with singer Lindsay DePaul during his marriage to Micheline Roquebrune. She later said she regretted it, not because he was married, but because of his attitudes toward women. As his career slowed down, these controversies started to follow him more closely. It was no longer just about the movies. It was about the man behind the tuxedo. And just when it seemed the scandals had settled, another storm was brewing. He died in his sleep, far from the cameras, far from the spotlight. But what happened in his final years was stranger and more heartbreaking than anyone knew. Sean Connery passed away on October 31, 2020, at the age of 90. His family said he had been unwell for some time, but it wasn't until later that we learned the truth. Connery had suffered from dementia in his final years. His death certificate, obtained by TMZ, listed pneumonia and respiratory failure as the official cause of death. But that's not the whole story. He spent his final days in the Bahamas, living a quiet, reclusive life. The man who once stood at Tane, the center of global attention, chose to fade out privately, surrounded by close family. His ashes were cremated and secretly scattered in Scotland, a return to his roots, but without fanfare. And here's the twist. Despite the controversies, despite the scandals, Connery was still deeply loved. In 2004, a UK poll named him the greatest living Scot. In 2024, the Edinburgh International Film Festival launched the Sean Connery Prize for Filmmaking Excellence, a $50,000 award voted on by audiences, given to a filmmaker every year. His legacy was complicated, but undeniable. He was a working-class kid who became a global icon, a symbol of masculinity who battled personal demons, a hero to millions, and a man with secrets that only came out long after the spotlight had dimmed. He was Bond. He was broken. He was unforgettable. And the story of Sean Connery isn't just about who he played, it's about who he really was.